before I begin this event, because this is a campaign-related event, I'm required to include this disclaimer. This event is organized solely by the U.S. College of Publicans without the support or endorsement of the University of St. Thomas. The University of St. Thomas does not participate in political campaigns on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. And of course, follow us on Twitter and Instagram if you haven't already. A lot of spicy takes on there. Upcoming events. After this event, we will be having USD Professor Misha Schwartzman. He'll be speaking on February 28th from 6 to 7:30 at ASC 202. He will be talking about his time in the Soviet Union. He's actually from the Soviet Union. He escaped in the 80s, and he'll be talking about his memories of the secret police and the Stasi and that kind of thing. I think it's important as young people that we keep the memory of horrors of socialism and the Soviet Union alive, and I hope you all can make that next event. And then we also will be having Remnant News editor Michael Matt, and the topic will be what makes a university Catholic, i.e. is the University of St. Thomas still a Catholic university? I'll give you a hint, it's not. So that'll be on March 8th from 6:30 to 7:30 at OWS 150. Before we begin the actual speaking event, I'd like to bring this all to your attention. I don't know if you've noticed, but the political winds are shifting in this country. And I think that, especially this next election, 2022, where we'll vote not just for governor, but for state reps, for house reps, for both in the legislature and in the Congress. For the first time in 30 years, the party preferential poll from Gallup poll it favors the Republicans, and it's happened in 30 years. And it's a huge seismic shift as well. It was recently just announced this morning that Catherine Rice, a Democrat from New York, will also not be running. She makes the 30th House Democrat who's not running for re-election. That's huge news. That means that they're looking at the wins, and they'd rather not run again than get defeated in 2022. So, the red wave is coming, but it can't happen without you getting involved. Now, on some of the sheets here, I don't know if you see, there's a little paper here. I didn't make it to some of the seats in the back, but we'll have it here afterwards. If you want to get involved in this 2022 election, becoming an election judge, a poll watcher, or observe election machine testing, there's a desperate need for election judges right now. There's a code on the back here. We'll pass them on after the event is over, and you scan that code. It'll take you to the GOP website where you can get where you can give the Minnesota GOP your information. You can get involved. It says right here, but in 2020, the DFL had over 10,000 volunteers such as this, while the GOP only had 3,000 in Minnesota. So what ended up happening is you had entire precincts that were manned only by Democrats and no Republicans. Now, I'm not saying that any shenanigans happened. I'm not saying that. But I think that it is important that we preserve our election integrity and that Republicans are represented at the polls. So if you want to get involved, there's a QR code right here. I highly recommend you guys sign up. I'm signed up. I know a lot of people are signed up. You guys should get involved. So without further ado, our keynote speaker for tonight, Senator Michelle Benson is, of course, running for governor. She is originally from Murdoch, Minnesota. She received her undergraduate degree in chemistry from St. Kate's, and later she went on to receive her MBA from the University of St. Thomas. In 2010, she ran to represent the 31st District in the Minnesota Senate and won. Since then, she has both authored and co-authored numerous pieces of legislation and fought hard to advance conservative issues in the state legislature. Recently, she stood with other fellow lawmakers in passing the Minnesota proposing the Minnesota Parents Bill of Rights bill, or SF 2909. This bill would require schools to disclose course syllabuses and also strengthen parents' rights to review what their children are learning in schools, i.e. CRT, that kind of thing. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce candidate for governor, Michelle Benson.
Hi, I am Michelle Benson, and I'm running to be your next governor. I'm running because I believe Minnesota can be better than it is. I grew up in a small town. We had safe streets, a good public school, When I graduated, I did go to St. Kate's. Don't hold that against me. I took German here at St. Thomas. Thank you. Nope, that's okay. When I was at St. Kate's, I met my husband, Craig, who was serving the United States Naval Academy at the time. When he got commissioned, he joined the Navy Nuclear Submarine Force. So for 5 years, we moved around the country, 9 addresses in 5 years, so we didn't unpack much. But we chose to come back to Minnesota because it was a safe place with good schools. We could raise our family here near their grandparents, and we could live our family's dream. In the last couple of years, Tim Walz has turned all of that on its head. He let our cities burn. He locked our kids out of their schools. He prioritizes everything in St. Paul over your rights as an individual, over family budgets, over business success. Everything in his world is about making government bigger and people smaller. For me, Minnesota should be a place where we have safe streets, where we have a good education system, but most importantly, where your dreams are more important than the government, where what you want for your life and your family isn't decided by bureaucrats in St. Paul, but by your own work, seizing the opportunities you've been given, working, struggling, and when you succeed, you get to take the credit. You get to keep the fruits of your labor. So as your governor, I will prioritize, yes, public safety. That means we support the police, and I met a young man here who's looking at going into law enforcement. Thank you very much. We're going to hold prosecutors accountable. They don't get to decide to just waive entire categories of charges. Did you know that Choi and Freeman, Ramsey County and Hennepin County don't charge when felons are in possession of guns? They waive those charges, so gives judges less reason to put them in jail. And then there are judges who give criminals, career criminals, zero bail or cash bail and let them go back out on the streets to commit crimes again. So I will appoint judges who follow the law, not make it up as they go. Judges who value safety over being politically correct. Then we're going to work on our education system. Thank you. We need to work on our education system. So did you know Minnesota's in the bottom 5 for minority reading scores? I want you to think about that. Of all the 50 states, Minnesota's in the bottom 5. We're in the top 5 in taxes. So those of you who are finance and accounting majors, if we're in the bottom 5 in reading scores and the top 5 in taxes, is it a money problem? It's a standards problem. It's a systems problem. It's a holding educators accountable problem. So let's put parents in charge of education so they can partner with teachers and do what's right for our kids. That means, as a parent, you get to see what's going on in your child's classroom. As a parent, you get to take the money that the state designates for your child and go to school that meets that child's needs, whether it's based on your faith or a child having special needs like a learning disability. There are schools that specialize in teaching kids with dyslexia. If literacy is a problem, let's give kids and parents the tools they need to overcome their challenges. And then last but not least, let's have high standards and no excuses so the taxpayer dollars we do collect produce results and help our kids succeed so that every parent can partner with a teacher to help a child achieve their God-given potential. And last but certainly not least, we got to get out of the top 10 in taxes. As I said, we're in the top 5 in taxes. Massachusetts is 13th. Nobody thinks of Massachusetts as a low-tax state. So can we get our taxes under Massachusetts taxes? We can still meet the needs of our citizens, lower our taxes, but it's going to mean we have to change what's going on in St. Paul. So let's have audits of our agencies. I've worked with the legislative auditor since 2012. There is plenty more work to do, and a governor who goes into our agencies and holds people accountable, who puts on a hiring freeze and cuts spending so that we can stop collecting taxes from people who succeed and focus our state government on serving the people it's supposed to serve. Ladies and gentlemen, most of you in this room are the age of my kids. It is my mission to turn this state over to you as you become leaders better than I found it when I ran for office in 2010. I want to use my experience as Health and Human Services Chair. I want to use my 11 years of understanding the legislature and understanding the executive branch to turn our state into something amazing, so that every part of this state, the small town I grew up in, 300 people, can have a thriving economy with families that are successful, as much as downtown Minneapolis needs safe streets and families that are successful. We should open our minds. We should harvest our forests. We should use the ag land that we have been blessed with. But more than anything else, we need to lift the potential of every Minnesotan, of each of you. If you're thinking about the Air Force and you have the opportunity to move anywhere in the country, I want you to choose to move here when you're done with your service, because this will be a great place where we will be safe again, where our education system will be about children and not teachers' unions, and where your dreams are bigger than the budget in St. Paul. So I'm Michelle Benson. I want to answer your questions so that I can be your next governor. So let's start with questions. Who's got?
Why don't we give a round of applause? All right, so we'll open up for a Q&A. However, I do have, as sometimes I use my presidential.
Take the privilege, yes.
For the question. So, we actually last December, we put out a statement about the university's changing of the vaccine policy. I think a lot of us were affected by that. With the conscientious objection that was allowed to us in the fall was not provided.
Was very tight. Yeah.
A lot of us didn't know if we'd be able to come back, and luckily a lot of us were able to get religious exemptions, but I know some people who had to not come. Right as I hit push to put up our statement on Twitter, you replied to me right away, and you said, "David, how can I help you?" And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that and what came of that.
Sure.
And
well, and thank you. So this is actually, Minnesota statute provides for medical exemptions, acquired immunity or natural immunity exemptions, and the exemption based on your conscience. But because of the way the law was structured, St. Thomas didn't have to conform. So I reached out to university presidents, including my alma maters, and asked them to follow those guidelines. Not everybody did. I understand that, but that is my responsibility as a leader, to reach out, to use my authority to push, to make sure that your individual rights are protected. That's what our country is founded on, the idea that the individual is responsible for their life, can make their own choices. Yes, you have to deal with the consequences of those choices, but you get to make those choices. And so I actually have a bill that I'm asking for a hearing in higher ed that would say if there's any mandate at a higher ed institution or in a K through 12 school, you would have to allow for those exemptions: medical, natural immunity, and conscience rights. It's in Minnesota law, more narrowly applied, and I think it has a lot of common sense support behind it. And after what we've been through in the pandemic, we know your population was at significantly lower risk than the elderly. And so you need to be able to, as adults, make that choice for yourself. And so that would be part of how I make decisions as governor. Does it respect the rights of the individual? Does it trust you to make the right decision for your life? And does it respect that you will take responsibility for the consequences of your actions? And so I hope to continue to be your voice for medical privacy and medical freedom.
Thank you. All right, so any other questions? Peter.
So I'm wondering what kind of policies you're going to put in place beyond what you just mentioned to prevent such policies we've seen that have happened during COVID from happening again. There's an activist group that I've been following, Action for Liberty, and they've put out never again pledges, and they sponsored some never again bills that would like explicitly say, we're not going to do this stuff again. So I was wondering if you
Yeah.
have anything similar that you were going to prioritize
Sure.
when you had it.
So when it comes to executive power, I've voted several times actually to limit the power of the executive. And as governor, you need to know that when I look at the Constitution, our federal Constitution and our state Constitution, they list the legislative body above the executive branch. I don't think our founders just rolled the dice and decided that. I think they wanted us to be clear that while we have 3 equal branches of government, there's one that's just a little more equal. So the legislative branch in a tiebreaker should always get more authority. So when it comes to executive power, the bill that we voted on in the Senate, a limit of 30 days, and then the House and the Senate have to agree to extend it. The Never Again bill leaves us with 0 days. And I think there needs to be some leeway. There are times when it snows and a barn collapses and you need the authority to go in and help retrieve, for example, cows that might be trapped in a barn roof collapse. You know that actually happened, right? It snowed so much it collapsed a barn, and so emergency powers were then given to bring resources into that county. So I think 30 days, but the most important thing, the House and the Senate have to both affirm that it's extended. And so I think that's how we resolve that balance of power. But beyond just emergency powers, the executive branch has a lot of rulemaking authority. So how many of you are familiar with the California CARS emission standards? Governor Walz put those in through rulemaking instead of bringing it to the legislature for a public debate. And so let's reduce rulemaking authority in the executive branch. The legislature should bring a proposal, put it on my desk, that reduces the ability for executive branch rulemaking. Yes, it might tie my hands, but if we have a governor in the future who wants to exceed legislative authority, at least there would be some check on that. The third thing that the Walz administration did during COVID, they had access to federal money. The legislature couldn't pull back, couldn't claw back some of their uses for that federal money. We could put a 10-day hold on it, but that really is just like a speed bump when they're on their mission. And so let's make sure the legislature has more control over federal dollars coming into this state. You want to talk about never again? Never again should one man have access to billions of dollars without legislative check. So let's look at 3 things to limit executive power. First, the emergency powers changes I talked about, limits on rulemaking, which Mary Kiffmeyer's carried a bill on it for years. So let's look at that language. And then last but not least, limits on the ability to spend federal money without legislative oversight. So I know that was a much longer answer than what you were looking for, but I think about limiting the executive a lot, especially as a member of the legislature. So thanks for your question. Yes?
I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that there was a clause passed in the Minnesota Constitution, I believe in the 90s, that basically makes it impossible for any laws to be passed that would, restrict abortion in Minnesota. Is that the case or no?
No, and I don't mean to jump on the correction, but Dovi Gomez is the case that you're talking about. So the federal government has Roe versus Wade, and then the state of Minnesota has Dovi Gomez, which is the parallel to Roe versus Wade, but on a state level that also compels it to be treated as any other health condition, and so that's why we end up with funding abortions in Minnesota.
What would you do as governor to put forth pro-life policies that, or at least counteract the negative effects of a case like that?
Well, I have carried more pro-life legislation than anyone else in this race, and I look at 2 things. First of all, are we supporting moms who are in a difficult circumstance, and are we protecting babies? And so if Roe versus Wade is overturned at the federal level, that brings the debate down to the people of Minnesota in the legislature. And if we pass language then, and I sign it into law as governor, it would have to be taken to the Supreme Court in Minnesota to see if we could overturn Dovi Gomez. So that would be the path. Okay?
What's your opinion and plan
ahead going forward?
Sure. If they pass all of their permitting as required by federal and state law, I think we open the mines because it's safer to do it here than to let China do it. And what do I mean by safer? We have labor laws that make sure it isn't slave labor or child labor, as happens in the Congo. And then we have better environmental protections than China does. So if we want to move to a technology forward, renewable energy environment, we're going to need some of the minerals that we have on the Iron Range. And so if we're going to move that direction as a country, we should move by protecting the environment, having good labor standards, and opening mines in Minnesota instead of opening them in China.
Let's say you were Governor Walz right now and you had the $7 billion surplus. What was your plan with the money?
Cut Social Security taxes, pay back the unemployment trust fund, which we already voted on, and then across the board income tax cuts so that Minnesota can be competitive again.
Regarding election integrity, well, many of these people believe that the 2020 election was stolen and that there was, and regarding the audits like in Arizona, Pennsylvania, and all those key states, there's lots of fraud, and Wisconsin. What will you do as governor regarding election integrity?
Sure, and I did drop a bill on election integrity, and I've always supported voter ID. And for those who talk about, and this is for you to be informed as you go in public, we can pay for people to get an ID. Having an ID goes much deeper than voting. And I'm going to take a little tangent here because we do have time, so thank you for giving me time. If you don't have an ID, how do you open a bank account? Somebody gives you a check and then you go to a check cashing location where they take 20% to process your check. How is that fair or just or right to that individual? So let's make sure they have an ID. If you want to get on an airplane, you need an ID. If you want to apply for a job, you need an ID. So instead of the left's answer, which is voter ID is voter suppression, let's use it as an opportunity to empower people, to fully enfranchise people in all aspects of life, including voting. So we're going to pass voter ID. And then provisional ballots, that's just a fancy way of saying every ballot has to go through the same legal vetting process. Let's make sure that those ballots that are registered and cast on the same day go through a legal vetting process. Let's make sure we use paper ballots, not electronic voting, so that we can do the audits we need to do. Let's make sure Mark Zuckerberg doesn't send money in to facilitate our elections. Your county and your state can pay for elections, and if we need to do election outreach, then let's have that debate at the legislature instead of in Silicon Valley. So, any more questions?
Yes, regarding the OSHA, like the Supreme Court ruled that they did not require businesses to require their employees to get vaccinated, but they did require federal-run hospitals for their
Yes.
to get vaccinated. Well, what will you do as governor regarding vaccine requirements, vaccine mandates, but also masks?
I've been clear the state of Minnesota should not be mandating vaccines or masks other than through the process that's already in law. The mask mandate is outside the bounds of state authority, in my opinion. We can debate it in court. I'll get lawyers. But there is already a provision in law for vaccines for elementary school children, for, as you know, institutions of higher education. So measles, polio, those are all put through a process that is transparent to the public and debated with public health officials. It's not one person's decision. It's a public vetting. And so that's the only way I think we should add vaccines to that schedule. When it comes to the federal government, so I ran in 2010 because the federal government was trying to take over our nation-leading healthcare system. And it's not the job of the federal government to run healthcare in Minnesota. So as governor, I would have pushed back, joined other governors around the country to stop the OSHA mandate and stop the CMS mandate, because our state should be making decisions about public health for the benefit of Minnesotans. Yes. One more question. Let's go up here.
What's your position on electric vehicles and charging stations?
I see that Tesla is actually rolling out charging stations across the state and across the country. And I think Elon Musk is a pretty smart guy. He'll figure it out and he'll figure out a way to make money on it. We don't need to subsidize that, nor, and here's something important for those of you who are looking to buy a house at some point in the future, there are people who want to mandate electric vehicle charging stations in your home. Yeah, think about what cost that adds, and you might not own an electric vehicle. And so let's let the market decide. If you want an electric vehicle, you find a charging station, you figure out how to do the battery replacement. So that's where I'm at. And remember, we talked about the California cars mandate? That's all about electric vehicles. As governor, I know you're perfectly capable of choosing a vehicle that work for your needs. So how many of you are poor college students? You don't have to raise your hand. Right now, you can buy a gas-powered used car that can get you to and from work. And you're probably going to own that car for quite a few years. How much do you think a used electric vehicle is going to cost in 10 years? And how much is the battery going to cost to replace in that used electric vehicle? So how much lithium do we have in world reserves for lithium batteries in those electric vehicles? So we need to start asking a few more questions before, well, first of all, we shouldn't mandate, but secondly, let's ask questions and make informed decisions as consumers, as people who can make their own decisions about what car they drive and what meets the needs of their household and their budget. So, okay, we're starting to circle back to second questions. Go ahead.
So I would like to say that Bezos and I believe Bloomberg have a plan for the lithium. They're buying mines in Iceland right now, and they're going to be developing that. So they have a they way to make money.
Somebody will figure it out, or the market will punish them for failing.
But my question is about what I believe is the real pandemic sweeping across the country, and that's the cultural Marxism being exemplified through the transgender agenda by kind of warping people's minds into believing that there's more than just a binary gender system. And so that's being seen through like the gender unicorn. Kids are being sent home with like pamphlets being asked what they feel like if it's a boy or a girl today. We have the gay flag or whatever you want to call it flag in schools instead of the American flag. And I just kind of want to know what your stance is on this whole issue in general. And the reason why I bring it up is because I have a transgender cousin and a gender fluid cousin. So it's close to home.
I understand. And so this is something I think parents need to be able to talk about their kids, or talk about with their kids, and not have it have their family structure undermined in our public school system in particular. And some of this can be resolved by giving parents a choice, so that if you're in a school that doesn't respect your role as a parent, you can move your child somewhere where that role as a parent is discussed. And let's be straightforward. 5 years ago, this wasn't a conversation. And so we need to be really clear about what's happening, especially to our youngest children, in these conversations, making permanent life choices that will impact them for the rest of their life. And that is the role of a parent, should not be undermined by adults in the school. So, yes, yeah.
What about your position about illegal immigrants? Biden administration, they are secretly distribute over a billion illegal immigrants all over the United States. I'm sure we have some of them. I don't want my money goes to them because I work so hard to make money and to support my family. So I want to know, what do you want to do?
Well, let's start with, we are a nation that has always welcomed immigrants, but it has to be done legally. We have to know who's here. And thank you for coming here and choosing this country. I was fortunate to have dinner with a man from Brazil who is coming here to work. And he referred to it as the American dream. All over the world, it's referred to as the American dream. So we know why people want to come here. Let's do it in an orderly way. Let's make sure that people who come here are ready to work and want to embrace the American dream and want to be on a path to citizenship. Let's welcome them with open arms. But when it comes to illegal immigration, there are so many people who we won't know what their purpose is here. Do they want to come here and work and live productive lives, or do they want to undermine the good of this country? And here's something that doesn't get talked a lot about. There are children being brought here to Minnesota, and we don't know if they're with parents. We don't know if they're with a trusted family member. And so we need to look deeply into who the Biden administration is sending here, especially children, because I do not want those children trafficked or in harm's way. And maybe they get sent back to their family in their country of origin, but if they're going to be here, they should be part of our child protection system so that we make sure that they are educated, that they are not being harmed. And the fact that the Biden administration won't disclose that to us is of grave concern to me.
Just playing off that, from what I understand, St. Paul and Minneapolis are sanctuary cities, right?
Yeah.
And
As governor, do you have any plan on what to do about St. Paul and Minneapolis being sanctuary cities?
I haven't developed a specific policy on that, but I'm happy to think about it and engage in a debate. That might be something to put through the legislative process so it can be vetted fully. No snap decisions. Okay? Yes?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just wondering what your opinion is on calling in like the Minnesota National Guard in response to like the BLM riots that happened just recently, because I know as Minneapolis and St. Paul citizens, a lot of us were affected by that. You can see the smoke almost from here, and I lived with my girlfriend at the time, and just a couple miles south of here we did have younger patrolmen with ARs also marching down the street. So I know it's a touchy subject to maybe not make it seem too archaic with armed guards just marching around our neighborhood, but also wanting to keep us safe. So I'm just wondering how you'd go about calling in the National Guard.
I remember 9/11, and I remember dropping my husband off at the airport for the first time after 9/11 and seeing an armed member of the military standing at our airports. And as an American, the thought of having armed guards on our streets was, it was shocking and felt wrong. We're supposed to be in a safe country where people respect one another. And so then, when the riots were happening and I drove to work and I saw members of the National Guard in my building and parked outside the Capitol. And then in Minneapolis, when I drove to see the damage, I had that feeling come back. We needed the National Guard to keep us safe. They should have come out earlier. But we should all be uncomfortable with the thought of the military needing to be present on our streets to keep order. So we start with the most effective, least obtrusive force, and we go until there's peace. Okay?
Thank you.
In the back.
I'm curious as to how you went from studying chemistry to being in government.
Oh, okay, yes. Undergrad from St. Kate's, chemistry is very logic-based. I love science. Then I did research while we were moving around and decided to go to graduate school. And sometimes you need a career reboot. Don't tell your parents. So I got an MBA, but I'd taken enough classes to sit for the CPA exam. So I sat for the CPA exam. And the logic of finance, of the way businesses operate. I talked to many of you, your finance and your business majors, understanding a P&L and then thinking about how human beings behave in the larger economic sense and applying that at a very practical level. That's what I did when I worked at Deloitte. And then I became a mom, a stay-at-home mom. I love this country. My parents taught me the greatness of this nation, the history. We drove everywhere. We took long car trips. And as much as I might have complained, it was really good for me. And then I had a teacher in 10th grade who taught me that this country was the greatest country in the history of the world, and it was the only one formed on the idea that an individual was more important than the government. And so all of the logic of chemistry and the experience of business and the love of this country and the understanding of the structure of our Constitution got me off the couch in 2010. And I knocked on doors and I won. Because this country is worth fighting for. And our freedom's worth fighting for. And Minnesota's nation-leading healthcare system was worth fighting for, even though Barack Obama and Joe Biden and Tim Walz thought that it should be solved in Washington. And we've seen the mess that solving things in Washington has brought us. Not every decision should be made by Congress. And certainly, there are way too many decisions being made by bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. And so let's bring that power back here to the state. Let's bring that power closer to the people who have to deal with the consequences, who are capable of making these decisions, who want to just live their lives. And if something needs to be done, they will come to the Capitol in St. Paul, and they will tell us about it, and we can deal with it here, instead of some mindless, faceless bureaucrat who doesn't know your life and doesn't understand it, making a decision that will change your life forever. That's how you get from chemistry to running for governor.
Let's kind of playing out that. So recently, at our last meeting, we played all of the candidates. Right? We played each one of your campaign ads, and we played your campaign ad. And you mentioned your campaign ad that after you got elected, you had your first child, and then you went to work like that next weekend. Would you mind talking about that?
Sure. So I'm running for office and find out I'm pregnant. Sometimes that happens. So I'm sworn in January. I decided to sit on the Health and Human Services Committee because we had to cut $1 billion. And there are a lot of people who depend on health and human services, so I wanted to make sure we were thoughtful. So on that Friday, they were going to have the hearing about all these budget cuts, and I had a C-section instead of going to that hearing. But the following Monday, I didn't want to miss the votes. There were going to be amendments, and our team was going to have to take some really hard votes, and I didn't want them to do it without me. And so, fortunately, at the time, Senator Amy Koch and Senator Michelle Fischbach were in charge of the Senate, so I had a little nook off my office, and they let me bring my daughter. And at that time, my husband was coming to work with me and making sure that she was cared for. But eventually, we had some homeschool families whose daughters would come to work with me. My mom came for a while. But after that first hearing, Senator John Marty, do any of you know him? And I'm telling this story live, so maybe Senator Marty, if you haven't heard this, my apologies. But he was sitting next to me while we were taking these votes, and he was saying, political things. And we were on the opposite side of every single vote. And as soon as we got done voting, he turned to me and he said, "Did you bring the baby?" And so I took him back to my office, and he held my daughter and told me how beautiful she was. So even though you can fight like cats and dogs, there's a little bit of humanity that comes when there's a baby in the room. You haven't asked a question yet, so I'm going to go to people who haven't asked questions. So please, if you haven't asked a question, raise your hand.
As governor, what would you do to kind of attract businesses to the state of Minnesota to set up shop here in?
Oh, so many things. Yes, great question. So we need to improve our tax climate. We have to be competitive, not just with surrounding states, but with states across the country. Texas obviously has a better tax climate. So does Indiana, so does Massachusetts, so does Utah. So let's improve our tax climate. Let's make it less of a burden to start a business here by reducing regulations. Just farm permitting. You can't roll up your topsoil and move your farm. So we should be really careful about how much we regulate farms, especially when we're competing with Iowa and South Dakota and Wisconsin. Did you know? Tuck this in the back of your mind. South Dakota produces more dairy than Minnesota does. I want you to think about that. We are going to lose dairy in Minnesota if we're not intentional about the way we regulate farms. So taxes, regulation. How about we attract talent back here? Let's make our institutions, higher learning, places that attract talent, not political correctness. Utah's kicking our butt in pulling talent out of Silicon Valley. Lincoln, Nebraska is being aggressive about getting talent out of Silicon Valley, and you all know Austin, Texas. So let's look at what's coming next in the economy and attract a workforce that wants to live in Minnesota, because this is a beautiful state. As much as I might complain about our government and our taxes and regulations, you know we have a beautiful state. And people should want to live here, so let's stop scaring them off. Okay? Anything more?
Nope, that was it.
Great, thank you. Okay, you haven't asked 2 questions yet.
I come from a farming family myself. I understand you do too. We farm corn and soybeans. And kind of playing off the previous question, what would you do to make Minnesota a more hospitable place for farmers, especially family farmers?
To keep family farms here, we have to make it easier to pass those farms down to the next generation. So cutting the estate tax would be step 1. Because if you have to sell portions of your farm, it's going to get purchased by a corporation or by lawyers, God bless them, who live here in the Twin Cities and don't understand the first thing about what it means to be stewards of the land. And so that would be the first thing that I would do to make it easier to pass a family farm down. And on that vein, I don't know about you, my first job was picking rocks. 8 years old, my dad took me out and I picked up, he gave me a 5-gallon pail and he said, fill it. And so I was picking up like tiny little rocks. And my dad came back and he said, no, they need to be as big as 2 of your fists. So my dad taught me not just how to work, but how to work the right way. And I have never forgotten that lesson. So there's something really valuable about growing up in a place where you're expected to work at a young age and bring those lessons forward with you. Sir, thank you for raising your hand.
I have a 2-part question. One is, how would you handle the Met Council? And the second part is, how would you handle fiscal disparities program that's in place in Minnesota, which that's a tool?
And so the Met Council, is our regional planning entity, and it is out of control. It has lost its core focus. So as governor, you get the power to appoint people. So appoint people who are going to pull back on the Met Council. And then you don't tell the legislature what to do, but you can champion fundamental Met Council reform that permanently limits their authority. We need to put people on that board who are elected, because if they're going to have taxation authority, those individuals need to be elected and not appointed by the governor. So we start out by the governor appoints and then the legislature producing some fundamental reforms so we get in line with other regional planning entities around the country. Nobody else has as big a problem with their regional planning as Minnesota does. And we need to, if we want our metro to continue to economically thrive, remain safe, have affordable housing, we need to get the Met Council in check. Absolutely. Oh, and Southwest Light Rail, done. We do not need to spend another $200 million exploring the next light rail line. We need to stop dumping money down a rat hole. Yes?
Yeah, regarding big tech censoring conservative voices, but also with these gun policies in Minnesota, and also woke companies, what will you do as governor regarding our constitutional rights to freedom of speech, to owning a gun, but also to fixing this woke nonsense?
And when it comes to gun ownership, I support the Second Amendment. So I would veto red flag laws. I would veto universal background checks. I would support anything that affirms your right to protect yourself. It is a God-given right, and it exists in our Constitution for a good reason. When it comes to big tech censorship, the First Amendment refers to Congress making no law, but I think we need to figure out if Facebook, if Instagram, if TikTok, Twitter, if they're platforms or publishers. Because if they're just a platform, it should be like when you answer the phone. They don't filter your conversation. But if they're a publisher, then they need to be accountable under publishing laws. And that's how I would suggest resolving that. When it comes to, you called them woke corporations, there just needs to be marketplace consequences for those choices. I think they should be focusing on building talent, and if they want to reach into minority communities and lift them up, let's work on workforce and housing and stronger families and the things that will really make a difference instead of window dressing and pronouncements. Yes.
So, part of my question is gonna be kind of backed off of his, and that part is, what's your stance on constitutional carry? And then beyond that, within the Constitution, it talks about the only money that we can use is gold and silver-backed money, which we don't have anymore. And Minnesota actually taxes the purchase of gold because it doesn't see it as an investment or as money. So, I kind of believe that we're going into a hyperinflationary period here because we can't pay our debt off, so we have to do it anyways. So I believe that's super important that gold is not taxed anymore. And beyond that, what's your stance on like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, given that Arizona, I believe, is making moves to make that legal tender within their state, and Texas is becoming a powerhouse in Bitcoin mining and trying to attract the blockchain, along with Miami allowing like certain payment, like taxes to be paid in Bitcoin and trying to be a hub as well.
And I'll follow the evolution of cryptocurrency. I don't want to get too far out on a limb because states don't make broad monetary policy. I think eliminating the tax on gold and silver because it is a proxy for currency makes some sense. I'll look into it. When cryptocurrencies become a normal part of our financial transactions, I think the state should definitely look at how they're going to be involved in that kind of transaction. But I don't want to get too far out over my skis and make pronouncements. I do have more to learn. I can do energy policy, I can do ag, I can do lots of things, but when it gets into cryptocurrency, I've got some to learn. Yes?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that a number of years ago you co-authored a bill for single-payer healthcare and then didn't vote for it. Is that?
I've never authored a bill for single-payer healthcare. Whoever told you that is lying.
So I know that recently the Senate has passed legislation and also dropped some legislation to promote our law enforcement and also to help take care of the deficit we currently have with law enforcement officers. Are there any steps, or what would you do as governor to try to promote and support our law enforcement?
Sure. Well, as people go through law enforcement training, they have to do something called passing skills. And so let's give them some loan forgiveness after they've passed skills and the background checks necessary to be in Minnesota law enforcement. Let's keep them here instead of having them move to other states. When it comes to retaining officers in law enforcement, let's make sure they have access to the best training, collaborative training, so that they feel part of a team and well connected. And there's something that we've learned from our military as they come back from deployments. There's a lot of mental stress, even PTSD. And that happens in law enforcement as well. Let's make sure that there's counseling available, and I would suggest required, so that people who've been through traumatic circumstances as officers have the opportunity to be mentally healthy. That will help keep them in law enforcement, but it will also help reduce strain on their families, because the families of law enforcement officers are impacted as well. And I want you to think about, as you all think about people in law enforcement, I've talked to a number of officers, and they don't forget knocking on the door of a woman whose son died in a car accident and her reaction. They don't forget the first child they ever saw die. And all of this builds up in their brain. And they need a good way to talk about it so it doesn't become crippling. And then think about what happens every day when you put on a bulletproof vest. Why do you put on a bulletproof vest? Because you know in the course of that day somebody might shoot at you. So what does that do to a person? And so mental health isn't the full solution. Let's support them with training. Let's attract them with loan forgiveness. But let's also make sure that we honor good cops and hold bad cops accountable. Raise the profession. Yes?
So I'm actually not from Minnesota, I'm from southwestern Wisconsin. But a growing kind of push down by that part of the state is a push for Second Amendment sanctuary counties. And the last time I checked, Minnesota only has very few Second Amendment sanctuary counties. As governor, would you help to push for more, despite no matter who's in office in St. Paul or what party can control that, Minnesotans across the state have the right to bear arms, despite who's in St. Paul?
And I think we work with the legislature and then sign as governor something that just affirms your right to defend yourself and not go county by county. Yes.
Just in broad strokes, from my understanding, a Republican governor hasn't been. I think
Tim Pawlenty.
Plenty was the last one. He was like 2001, I believe. So a Republican, we haven't had a Republican governor in a long time. There's only
Well,
25
it's about time, and we're going to have to clean house. There's been a lot of stuff that, you know how when you don't go through your house, you accumulate things that you don't mean to accumulate or that just get left there? Yeah, it's time to clean out some closets in St. Paul.
Well, I guess my question is about electability. What is your plan overall, assuming you do get the nomination in August, what is your plan to go to suburban neighborhoods, to go to rural places, to go to urban, because my understanding the voter registration is 40% Democrat, 25% Republican. So there's a lot of ground to make up with independents. And what is your plan to get out that vote?
Sure. And we don't actually have party-affiliated registration. And so they're getting to be fewer and fewer Democrats. The more radical the left gets, the fewer people specifically identify as Democrat. The more radical the right gets, the fewer people specifically identify as Republican. So let's look at this big swath in the middle. What do they really want? They want their cities to not burn. So let's talk about not letting our cities burn. They want to be able to come to Minneapolis and St. Paul and not worry about getting carjacked. Let's not have crime spread to the suburbs. Let's make sure we're safe here in Minnesota. So we'll support law enforcement. We'll make sure prosecutors are doing their job. And we'll appoint judges who follow the law, not make it up as they go. And then what else do they want? They want their kids to get a good education. And if you're going to pay for something, you should actually learn to read. You should actually know how to do math when you graduate. So let's go to those independents and say, your city is going to be safe. You get to be in charge of your kids' education and hold our education system accountable. And then let's open up this state. Let's open it up by getting government out of the way. Fewer regulations, lower taxes, but let's talk about their dreams, because the dream of every Minnesota family is being squashed by Biden inflation. The cost of gas, the cost of food. Let's make sure that Minnesota is a place where the economy turns around. You can find good work so you can support your family. You can afford a home. Did you know Minnesota's cost per square foot for housing is at least $20 higher than Wisconsin and Iowa? Why? Let's get government out of the way so you can afford a home. Let's listen to the people of Minnesota. Good jobs, affordable housing, a good education system, safe streets. Let's go get people who want to dream big in Minnesota. Smaller government and bigger dreams. That's what we're going to talk about all day long.
Does anyone have any other questions? Well.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to make my final pitch. You can have the farm ethic. You can have the work ethic of a farm girl, the steadfastness of a Navy wife, the skills of a CPA, the experience of a senator, and the common sense of a mom as the next governor of Minnesota. It would be my honor to serve you as your governor. So, thank you very much. And one more request. On the business cards I was handing out, there's a QR code. Go sign up, volunteer. We can always use, if you're looking for an opportunity to be on a campaign, we would love to have you. If you want to engage in a historic campaign, because I don't talk about it much, but I would be the first woman governor of Minnesota. So if you want to be part of history, join us. Thank you.
Well, that's all we have for tonight. Thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it. If you have any other questions for Michelle,